You say the culture is effectively being held hostage by its own hyperbole. What does that mean?
Well, that is from my 2019 book, The Problem with Everything. So I probably wrote that sentence, I don't know, 2017. And at the time, I was just referring to the fact that everything is extreme, right? Everything is the most, the worst. We've never been in a worse time. Believe all women, don't believe anybody, don't believe any institutions. So I think that we slipped into this mode of speaking and therefore this way of thinking. In my view, 2013, 2014, I started to notice it. So when I wrote that sentence, we're being held hostage by our own hyperbole, I was talking about something that I think is, to speak in a hyperbolic way, infinitely worse now.
Well, unpack that for me a little bit more. You said you started noticing it in 2013, 2014. What was actually going on then?
What was going on was that you had the rise of these digital platforms, the blogosphere. You had a lot of people who had been in journalism, who had been kind of public intellectual writers, essayists, observers of the culture, writing on digital platforms that were not really gate-kept. They were not edited necessarily. There was not a lot of rewriting going on. There was a lot of instant response. And there's a lot that's good about that, obviously. But I was noticing that people who I had considered quite thoughtful, quite nuanced in their thinking, quite experienced, were just saying stuff off the cuff that sort of maybe felt good in the moment, but was either wrong or didn't make any sense. And people were eating it up. They loved it. And so that became, instead of this kind of fringe part of the culture, a kind of alternative media space, it became the mainstream. So it was creeping up and up. And so, as somebody who has been writing and publishing since the early 1990s, I was first curious and then I became alarmed because to me, it's not sophisticated thinking. And there were a lot of supposedly sophisticated people carrying on this way. And I found it disturbing.
Why do you think it's been able to dominate the discourse so much? We've got all these intellectuals at the top that you speak about, that you've heard speaking on different formats. They've written books. Yet suddenly now they keep on retreating to the most basic, polarizing sloganeering.
Yeah.
Surely, if they're intellectuals, they're going to be better than that. They're going to keep on pushing the nuanced message and churning out their books rather than clips on TikTok.
Some of them are not intellectuals. They are thought leaders. It's not the same thing.
Why isn't it the same thing?
To me, look, this is all semantic, right? In my mind, an intellectual is somebody who is deeply read, widely read, knows, has really in-depth knowledge of a lot of different things, science, art, literature, philosophy, and can synthesize these things in a way that brings forth original ideas. Now, maybe that bar is too high. And by the way, I'm not even putting myself in that category. I think you have a lot of people talking about ideas in a pretty facile way. I think the TED Talk phenomenon really gave rise to this. You had people standing on stages with fancy backgrounds and, like headset microphones and talking about ideas worth spreading, right? And ideas worth spreading became a substitute for ideas worth considering. We were just spreading them without critiquing them necessarily or checking them. And I think people got really seduced by this. And obviously, then you had digital media and you had social media, and it was a lot easier to get stuff out there. You didn't have to run stuff past an editor or a publisher or, God forbid, a lawyer who was working for a media company. So I just think that we have a different set of standards,
Yeah, the flip that I've noticed with social media specifically enabling this is that the media used to reflect reality, but now it seems that reality is reflected based on social media. It comes second rather than first. We're workshopping the thumbnails and the titles and the clips before we actually interact with reality. And that might sound really trivial to some people, and they'll go, yeah, game's the game. But to me, that's terrifying. The fact that single-handedly social media can change the entire direction of the planet to optimize for clicks and views and engagement, rather than actually unfolding in a natural way and potentially pseudo-bro-scientific evolution brain on here, you start to open up all of these evolutionary mismatches where, for all of history so far, we've been able to survive as human beings through engaging with the environment and optimizing for survival. Big pivot, we're optimizing for clicks online and trivial forms of engagement. Potentially, the glorification of things like having a career and not prioritizing kids just leads to population collapse and extinction.
Yeah, so maybe this is all, we're just setting ourselves up for, this is a mass extinction event. No, I think you're on to something. I'm always curious, and I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, I'm Gen X, right? So I was born in 1970, all right? I'm probably older than your parents. And for us, like, the worst thing you could be was like a sellout, or giving off any kind of vibe that you were trying hard, or that you were caring what people thought, or that you were promoting yourself, especially if you're an artist or creative person. Like, that was the least cool thing. And so even now for me, as a content creator and as an independent creator, it's very, very difficult for me to do any of these things. I can tell you, I've been doing a podcast for 5 years, more than 5 years. And I have never once done A/B testing on like a show title or a clip or anything like that. And that is probably evident with, considering my audience would probably be a lot bigger if I did those things. But I just can't do it because it's anathema to my sense of self as a creative person and as as a semi-public quasi-intellectual.
Yeah, I wonder where the line is. It's something I do, is optimize titles, thumbnails, and importantly, I try really hard not to spill over into clickbait and being disingenuous. And I've had countless debates with different creators about them doing that and me calling them out for it. But with that optimization, you're essentially gamifying conversations about culture and politics and religion and philosophy and all of these things that run much deeper than a quantifiable best way to engage an audience over Instagram. So I wonder where the line is of optimization versus, like you want to do, letting the creative juices flow and kind of just seeing what happens. Because I think there's a magic in that too.
There is a magic in that. I mean, I have had a very long career based on that magic. I started publishing books in the 90s. I managed to write them all by myself and get them published by publishers who were not using AI to generate press releases and getting reviewed by critics in major publications and kind of floating along that way. Not floating along. I mean, it took a lot of effort, but it did work for a long time. I'm not going to sit here and say it can still work. Obviously, it can't. But, one of the things that I notice with young people, and again, this is something I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about, is like, why does nobody just want to get like a regular job anymore and and have a nice life and settle down? We have all this conversation about population collapse and the mating crisis, and I'm super interested in that stuff. But I think, to your point, part of what makes that difficult is because people they think that they have to like have establish themselves economically or professionally before they settle down. Okay, fair enough. But when they think that the only way to establish yourself is to like have a YouTube channel or be an influencer or self-propel in this way, that's going to eliminate most people because most people can't do that. Like, what is so unappealing about just like getting a job at some company? I mean, I know I sound like a boomer, but these things still exist, right? You can still get a good job with good benefits and have a nice life. Can you not?
I don't know what came downstream from what? But it seems, especially in the UK, it might be different here in America. So push back on me if you disagree. But in the UK specifically, if you have a normal job, especially living in London, where really you want to live, the rest of the UK, especially north of the M25, not a nice place. Always rainy, cold, miserable, and questionable food choices. So if you're going to live in London, you kind of just need to have an above average job to be able to survive there. The cost of living is so high. But the problem is coming with that, and again, I don't know that if this is downstream from us prioritizing shiny objects and more marketable things rather than what we actually need. We've got all of these modern furnished apartments that are super expensive, super poor build quality, and you're not really able to live in them properly. There's not this lower bar to entry that you can actually cross and have a comfortable life in, because a lot of people make excuses for the reasons why people aren't having kids or are prioritizing hedonistic activities. A lot of the time they are just excuses, and actually if you just had the bare essentials, you would be able to do the things that give you more fulfillment. The problem I see in the West is that we've kind of lost that working class element.
Yes.
And now everything is not even middle class, but it's like aspiring to live like a royal with no option to just have a normal 2-bedroom house with a couple of kids. So that's one of the challenges. Another thing as well, to answer your question of why young kids don't just want to have a normal job, is I think we've just cut ties with wanting to make our families proud, because the family unit is less relevant to us than ever. When we can jump on a flight to LA for a couple of $100 if we get a good deal, where we can interact with people across the world via Instagram, it means that the stakes are lower with pleasing your family because they're not the only thing out there for you. Whereas before, I can imagine if you're living in a village, you want to make your parents proud because they're some of the only people you will ever meet. You're not going to venture outside of your village. Therefore, you're going to take over the blacksmiths from your dad or whatever it may be. So family pride is a big thing that I think there's been a death of. And having spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, where they have the complete opposite, they have managed to maintain those structures of family pride through conservative values and through their religion, and they will take up their dad's job. So I think it's pursuit of shiny objects, it's access to the global village rather than the local village, and it's a lack of access to easier, normal options.
Right. We have the same situation here for sure in the big cities. What you just described about housing costs in London is exactly the same in New York and Los Angeles. To some extent, places like Seattle, San Francisco. But I see a lot of discourse online like, why can't you, find a way? I mean, I follow a lot of manosphere content, actually. I actually am fascinated by it. And I see a lot of like, well, why can't you just live in a 2-bedroom house? Why do you have to live in a big city? Like, why can't you move to Columbus, Ohio and live in a modest house and start your family and move up in the world, as did many people? And I actually don't know the answer to that question. Why not? I mean, Cleveland, Ohio, forget Columbus. Okay, you can go to college in Columbus. Cleveland, Ohio is a great city. There's a world-class orchestra. The Cleveland Orchestra is arguably the best orchestra in the world. People don't realize this. There's art museums. It's 8-hour drive from the George Washington Bridge in New York City, actually. And yet, I see very few influencers living just like, a decent middle class on the way to upper middle class life in a city like that. Everything is like the Kardashians or Mormon trad wives. That's a sort of another version of it that are usually bankrolled by, some kind of corporate entity, sometimes their husband.
I think it's all on the way.
Mm-hmm.
This rise of people that are sick of these half-truths that are constantly fed to them online, telling them that they're going to be happy once they achieve X material, superficial thing. And you've written about this. You say, so seduced by the half-truths propagated by our own side, we have no interest in the half-truths roaming in distant pastures. So wary from trying to manage cognitive dissonance kicked up by our own gospel, we forget to have empathy for those grappling with the confusions of their own doctrines. We forget that in the end, to be human is to be confused.
Yes. Yeah.
Unpack that for me.
Well, that's, again, from my book, The Problem with Everything. And the half-truths idea came from a Joan Didion review from the early 1970s in the New York Times about a bunch of books coming out of second-wave feminism. And, a lot of what got me into this culture war stuff had to do with the way that the women's movement had, in my view, been hijacked by, like, a new wave of stupidity. Even before Me Too came along, I was critiquing this. But to answer your question, in that review, Joan Didion, who is revered by young millennial feminists, right? She's just like a goddess. She was actually very conservative, and she was talking about how these kind of platitudes about women's oppression and the patriarchy were actually half-truths. And she was saying this in 1972, I believe. And then they just keep getting circulated, and it just becomes an article of faith somehow. The idea that a woman makes 74 cents on the dollar to a man, that is not true. That just became a statistical platitude. And it got internalized by a lot of people, and a lot of people walk around assuming that that's the case. The idea that the number of unarmed black men killed by cops in the United States, people walk around assuming it's in the thousands or the 10,000s. It's double digits, low double digits.
I think it goes both ways as well.
Yes.
You see someone like Matt Walsh go on Joe Rogan, and he's speaking about conversion therapy and trans people having their gender affirmed and their genitalia mutilated. And he goes, millions of people. And then Rogan goes, Jamie, pull that up. It's 5,000.
I mean, it depends on how you count. I mean, mutilated by surgery is one thing. The word mutilated is a problem. Yeah, the gender thing is a whole other subject. I mean, I could go on about that for hours, partly because it really touches on all of what this is about on a very existential level. What is reality? What is material reality? So anyway, but to get back to your question, in my view, what started to happen is that the material reality that we had all enjoyed, collectively shared, that we could acknowledge was true, it started to erode probably in the 1980s. Just the media landscape changed. I mean, this has been written about. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. This has been covered. And in the beginning, it was television, right? Oh, that's going to change everything. And then it was 24-hour cable news. And then it was in the 90s, it was talk radio. Oh, my gosh. Rush Limbaugh is ruining, American political life because he's just spouting off nonsense, 4 hours a day on, AM drive radio. And that was all just nothing compared to what happened with the internet and social media. So people can choose their own reality. And I guess it kind of makes you sort of a short-term gratification because you can be kind of gratified in your own little silo. But the fact is you're disconnected from the rest of the world because we're just not on the same page.
George Orwell was wrong. We weren't going to have our power taken away by some authoritarian master. We were going to hand it to them in pursuit of cheap dopamine. I think that's what's happened, and Amusing Ourselves to Death is a perfect illustration of that. What do you think to politics, societal issues, and culture being viewed as forms of entertainment? Do you take issue with that, or do you think that's fine?
Well, it depends on what you find entertaining, right? Because you could go back and watch William F. Buckley debating James Baldwin, and I find that very entertaining. And that was certainly a lot more substantive than what we have now. I mean, I thought the Dick Cavett show was entertaining back in the 70s. This was a a talk show, late night talk show that everybody watched, where the host would interview a political leader 1 minute and then like a jazz legend, Oscar Peterson, the next. Like American intellectual life, and I'm sure this is true in the UK. This is true everywhere. It was. It had a meaning to it. There was like real stuff. And, you had like, let's not forget that as recently as, the 1960s, you had people who were like farmers in Nebraska who had read Shakespeare in their high school English classes. And for a whole bunch of reasons that has deteriorated. And we not only do we not read Shakespeare, we don't read anything because our attention spans have been eroded. And so it's memes and like random thoughts that people had and put in a thought bubble on social media or Instagram, and has somehow we're supposed to see this as a deep thought because it's in like a little bubble on a pink square.
I wonder if we're idealizing the wrong things. Back in the day, you would put someone on a pedestal that was a thinker. They're a great intellectual. They're a powerhouse. They're a Renaissance man. They can kind of juggle everything. Whereas now, especially speaking for my generation, if you ask someone, who's your favorite philosopher? They'll say like Plato or Socrates. Okay, who's your favorite contemporary philosopher? Is that still a thing? I thought philosophy was like something they did back in ancient Greeks.
Like ancient Greeks.
Yeah, isn't that like an old school thing when everything was black and white?
Right.
And like that was my view of stuff a couple of years ago before I went down the rabbit holes I did and got into the podcasting world. But putting my hands up here, that was my outlook on the world too. I thought idea formation was a thing of the past, which is a really odd thing to say.
Oh.
And I think it stems from this kind of end of history, Francis Fukuyama approach to life and the world, and the short-sightedness that comes with that, of thinking this is it. We're so evolved, we're flourishing, even though we're also complaining about everything going on in culture. This is the end of history. We've got the internet, we've got AI being developed now, and it kind of just stops here. So one of the key factors at play here, I think, for Gen Z is a paralysis caused by a lack of understanding that things always progress. They keep on going on.
You're reminding me, probably sometime in the 90s, I started observing that people would talk about philosophy, and what they really meant was like business philosophy or business books. Like I'd be talking to people, especially I remember having this experience, like I'd be talking to men, sort of men in their 20s and 30s, and they'd say, I'd be like, I'm a writer. So I'd be like, what do you like to read? And they go, oh, I read a lot of philosophy. And I was like, oh, well, what do you mean? Like, what's your, like Hegel or Nietzsche? And he'd go like, oh, what color is your parachute? That's what I mean. These kind of business books about how to figure out your true calling. I mean, this was before the kind of like, life hacking kind of business bro mode that we have now. But the word philosophy is really elastic, right? I mean, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean, self-help. Philosophy became self-help. I think that was another thing. So you would talk to men and they would say, I read a lot of business philosophy, business books. And then women would say, I read a lot of spiritual books or something. And what they really meant was self-help. And that's really not my definition of philosophy, but maybe I'm being a snob. So it wouldn't be the first time.
I don't think you are being a snob. I feel we're lacking the deeper, more difficult things to acquire. It's not easy to work out what your stance is on if we have free will, or what faith means to you, or what consciousness is. First of all, it's not sexy to talk about, other than on some small infographic, short and snappy on socials. But it's this whole Blaise Pascal thing of like all of man's suffering and problems stem from an inability to sit in a room in silence.
Mm-hmm.
We can't sit in a room in silence now because we doom scroll instead. So I wonder if that lack of difficult to attain thought has led to us replacing and patching over religion and community with new religions. The self-help space not just becoming a means to an end, which is a fulfilled life full of meaning and family or whatever else. That now is the thing.
Yeah.
The self-help is the thing. So there are all of these stops along the way that have become the destination. And you see it all over the place. You even see it with things like trans ideology that we can speak about, where the identity, which is part of living a fulfilled life, right? You want to know your identity, and we've forgotten that, like you say, humans are confused.
Mm-hmm.
We want this rigid identity. We want to understand it so that we can live a happy life.
Right.
But that's no longer the case. The identity is correlated with the happy life. It is the happy life. What's going on there?
Is it because a lot of the people who are caught up in this are not old enough to realize that the less you think about yourself, the happier you end up being? I mean, it might take a step to get to that. And certainly when you're in your 20s, like, who am I? Who am I? And I'm gonna find some kind of, not even fulfillment, but I'm going to arrive at some kind of nirvana if I figure out my true self, you know? But I think the happiness construct is really faulty. I always have talked about and thought about for myself the notion of contentment. Like, I want to be content. I want to not be agitated. I want to be agitated as little as possible. Obviously, you can't eliminate that. I want to feel like I'm in the right life. And that is not the same as being happy necessarily, but it's feeling aligned with whatever you're happen to be in. Like, whatever life that you have landed in, you got to kind of accept that it really doesn't have that much to do with you. You can make some efforts to kind of tweak it here and there, and you can kind of, you know, try to land your plane in more or less the right place. But we have very little control over this. And to me, the idea of happiness, it feels very chaotic because I don't know about you, but my feeling about happiness is that it's fleeting. Like, we have these moments of it and I feel like a joy, or maybe I'm, you know, taking a walk and just the light is just right and the air is just right and things feel right. And I have like a moment of true happiness. But I don't think you could sustain that around the clock. I think you would go insane.
We're pursuing fleeting things existing forever and permanently in our life. We think we can just sidestep reality and make these fleeting things permanent.
Yeah. Look, to some degree, well, I'm not even to some degree. People have always done this. People have lived through art. They have looked to ancient texts in ancient days. They have played music. They have tried to, I would imagine many people, I have always been this way. They have tried to go through life thinking of themselves as part of a larger narrative. Like, for me, you know, growing up in the 1980s and then I was in my 20s in the 1990s, I just imagined myself as being in like a foreign film, like a French film, like or a novel. I would walk around. I would be in the city. I would be with my friends. I would be writing. I would be looking out the window. I would be smoking a cigarette, you know, with contemplation. And I felt if I could picture myself as a character in like an artsy independent film doing this, then I thought, okay, I'm living my life right. This is where I want to be. If I'm sitting on the roof of my, you know, crumbling brownstone on the Lower East Side of New York City, and there's water towers around, and there's a, you know, particular kind of feel, like I am in the moment. This could be a cinematographer could have been here and like captured this moment, and I am in my life in the right way. And I spent a lot of my time in those kinds of moments before social media came around. And to me, and maybe this is a solipsistic way of thinking about this, but this is something I have written about quite a bit, and people have related to it. You know, the construct, the narrative construct that I was trying to place myself in back then was something that required some kind of attention span to even know about. Like, I had to sit through the foreign film in order to internalize it, to then walk around and think of myself as being in that film. I had to read the novel in order to have it playing in my mind. And now what we have is I'm going to sit on my roof and, look all around me, and then I'm going to sit here and take a selfie of myself and post it somewhere. And that's a totally different experience. And it's not a private experience. We lived in a series of private moments in the past. And if we were lucky, if somebody was there, we would share them with somebody else, but it would still be private. And that is what has fallen away. And that is a profound change.
Why is that important?
It's important because otherwise you're not actually with yourself, right? If you are taking a selfie and posting it on Instagram before the moment is over, or actually you're probably sitting there and like messing with the filter and trying to make yourself look better before you post it. I mean, you have a master, and that is this faceless public, or people that you're trying to impress, or clicks that you're trying to get, or likes, or whatever it is. You are a slave to your dopamine hit. The dopamine is coming from the response that you get from posting something that represents your experience. Where in the past, ideally, the dopamine would happen in the moment, during the experience.
Yeah. That just rubs off on every single experience you're ever going to have. If you fundamentally rewire your brain to only get pleasure from this external validation specifically as well in the online world, rather than looking at what's directly in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, you're taking the experience away from yourself. Look, I know I'm sure people are going to be watching this and saying like, oh, yeah. This is like, an old person, shaking fist at clouds, etc. But I don't think people are any happier this way. I think they're really unhappy or uncontent, not content. Let's put it that way. Forget about happiness. But there does seem to be a real kind of baseline, I don't want to say misery, but distress, a dis-ease that is pretty hard to kick.
I want us to dig even deeper on this point of half-truths. You say hysteria is monetizable. Why do you phrase it in that way?
Well, it is because you get it, the algorithm favors it. And, if you want to run around saying that 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 women are being sexually assaulted on a college campus, that will get you pretty far. People started saying that kind of stuff around 2013, 2014, and it caught on pretty quick, especially in the sort of feminist blogosphere. I mean, I write about this a lot in the book that you're citing, The Problem with Everything, which, by the way, was going to be called Woke Me When It's Over. That was my working title for that book, Woke Me When It's Over. And I thought, well, I don't want to. Maybe this is self-sabotage, but I thought that's a very funny line, but it's not a serious title. But like that statistic is just wrong. 1 out of 5 women being raped is patently wrong. If that were true, nobody would send their daughter to college. Why would you do that? Like, you would be a negligent parent. But that just caught on, and I think it was because it was one of those grab you by the collar, false statistics. But then I think that on some level, women, especially young women, kind of unconsciously liked the idea that they were in danger in this way, because I think it made them feel like they were alive in a certain way. Like it was a form of unconscious cosplay, this idea that you're in this kind of danger. But the dissemination of that kind of myth did an incredible amount of damage. Obviously, it did a lot of damage to men, and it did a lot of damage to people's psyches generally. And so I was very, very angry about that kind of thing in particular, especially when it came to women's experiences. So that's really why I started writing in a more direct way about the culture wars.
Well, what do you think to this bifurcation going on of young men and young women, especially politically? People say that men are becoming ever more conservative, young women are becoming ever more liberal. And actually, to pick people up on that statistic, because again, it's always quoted as a half truth. Gen Z, young men especially, 18 to 24, they're still liberal.
Mm-hmm.
They're just much less liberal than women who are very liberal.
Which wouldn't be hard, right? Yes, it's not hard to be less liberal than a lot of those women. Well, look, I mean, I think that third and fourth wave feminism created that situation totally. I mean, the dynamics that I was so frustrated by starting 10, 12 years ago directly set the stage for what we have now. There's no way that young men could not have become radicalized or at least deeply affected politically by the landscape of feminist politics. And it was what's so frustrating about it is that it was not even representative of most women. It was a particular subset of women. They were more likely to be not just in college, but in a particular kind of college that had purchase in the media. The New York Times doesn't really care what's going on at University of Alabama. They care about what's going on at Yale and Oberlin. And it's a very particular kind of person who was saying, oh, actually, the world is this way. We've decided that it's never been a worse time in history to be a woman. Never been a worse time. 2015, 2016, 2017, the worst possible time in the history of civilization to be a woman. I mean, that's laughable. But there was, I think, a need among people in the academy and in the media, frankly, with nothing better to do. There was a need to kind of chew on this idea and take it to the next level and kind of take it to some kind of thing where they could write academic papers about it or think pieces in New York Magazine. But they also kind of wanted to believe it was true because the world had become pretty great for women, you know?
Well, steel man their argument for me. Is there anything in there that is a truth they could be hanging on to?
Yeah. So I do think that the rise of digital pornography played a huge role in this. And that's actually something, and I've said this, that I was a little bit myopic about. I am of a generation where that wasn't really part of our experience. So I wasn't aware of how pervasive it was. So yes, I think that if you are a young woman and you have grown up knowing nothing but this particular kind of sexual expression, and you are dealing with men and trying to date men and trying to have relationships with men who have been like their idea of what is sexual pleasure is completely artificial. It has nothing to do with actual human connection. I think that would be very, very frustrating, if not if not disastrous. And I think that would make you really angry. So I do think that played a huge role.
Well, map that out for me a little bit further. Why does that then transcend just sex and experiences within that and impact the whole culture to the point where people can go, this is the worst time to ever be a woman?
Well, because they think if I don't get choked during sex, if I don't like that, I am not sexually appealing. Or they're noticing this phenomenon and then they are coupling it with false statistics about sexual assault. They're not realizing that what is now being classified as sexual assault can be anything from being violently raped to somebody putting his hand on you in a not great way at a crowded party. I just think that people got barraged with a lot of information that was wrong, and it happened to be piled on top of a sort of ambient experience with the other sex that was pretty negative because of the combination of pornography and, again, social media. And I don't know, just a kind of there is I really would be curious what you think about this, Elliot, because when I was growing up and when I was in my 20s, it was like men and women were just kind of all together. Like we would hang out, we'd go out and get drinks after work and make jokes and make politically incorrect, as we called it back then, jokes. And it wasn't a big deal. Like there wasn't this sense that there was some kind of like that there was some kind of animosity, default baseline animosity between the sexes. And I guess, division is monetizable. So any place you can find division, the culture will run with it. And that's what happened.
I wonder if we all just need to get laid more.
Well, apparently so. Apparently nobody does. Nobody gets laid now, according to statistics. Now, that might be wrong. That might be another one of those things that's a half-truth. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as soon as something is very foreign to you, you're naturally going to perceive it as more of a threat. So we've put up these artificial walls because division is monetizable and hysteria is monetizable. Therefore, of course, your natural state is going to be suspicion when you're speaking to the opposite sex. It makes complete sense. And tagged onto that as well is specifically this rise in, I guess you can call it, misandry.
Yes.
I don't want to throw around labels lightly here because that's what people do far too often with things like misogynist or transphobe or whatever.
I would call it ironic misandry. Yes.
What does that mean?
Oh, that was just this sort of, I drink male tears coffee mug, and this idea that men are so powerful that you can be mean to them and make fun of them because they can't be hurt by it because they have all the power. So I'm really just being ironic.
You're punching up.
Yes. Yeah. So I had a real problem with that because it's one thing to assume that all the men have the power if you're back in the Mad Men era, if it's the 1960s. If it is 2016 and you are still pretending and you are a college student woman and you are still pretending that the male species has power over you, you need to you're in the wrong decade, lady, because it hasn't been that way for a very long time.
I had an old friend message me the other day on Instagram, and she responded to one of my clips going, I can't believe you would make this assumption about women when we live in a patriarchy and they are suppressed and men have all the power, especially in institutions like college. And I go, are you serious? Men are behind every single stage of education.
Yeah.
Every single stage. Women account for 65% of master's degrees. The wage gap has now reversed. In the UK, between the age of 18 to 24, women earn 9% more than men on average.
Yeah.
Where is this patriarchy that you speak about? And specifically, the ironic misandry that comes from that. I'm just sat there and I'm going, when true masculinity is outlawed, only the outlaws are going to be brave enough to be masculine. Yeah. That's how you give birth to someone like Tate.
Yes. And whoever said, I will not take credit for this construct, it might have been Richard Reeves, the great, he's studying all this, author of Boys and Men, said, we had Jordan Peterson out there for a while doing really good things. Like, as eccentric guy, he said some things that were a little bit, he's abrasive. He doesn't always do himself favors. But he was saying some really important stuff that made a lot of difference to a lot of young people, especially men. And the mainstream media decided he was the devil. Like, they just threw him out. Like, we're not going to listen to any of this. This is a bad guy. And so we got Andrew Tate instead. If you had just kept Jordan Peterson, just held on to him, okay, let him in, let him stay, we wouldn't have ended up with somebody like Andrew Tate necessarily. No, the whole punching up idea drives me crazy when it comes to men and women, because to assume that any given man has power over you to the point where you can belittle him, berate him, you can sell T-shirts for little girls in Target or Walmart that say boys are stupid, throw rocks at them.
In Target?
Yes, apparently so. Yes. Well, Target also had their whole transgender tuckable underwear, tuckable bathing suit line for a while. Although that quickly fell away. But to assume that you can kind of have this vernacular just be part of the accepted way of carrying on, because obviously men have so much more power, and obviously we can shake our fists and throw tantrums because we are by definition subjugated by them. that's actually handing them power that they don't have. They didn't have the power, but by acting this way, you just gave it to them. And that makes me insane. It truly does. It's not good for women. And people would say to me when I started critiquing this stuff, I lost so many friends over this, and they would say, Meghan, why are you doing this? Why are you carrying on about this? Why do you care so much? Women are still suffering. Men are still in these top positions. Don't you care about feminism? And I say, yeah, I care about it more than you do, actually. I care about it a lot. I care about it enough to see the amount of damage that you are doing to women. And I'm going to speak up about it. And it still boggles my mind the way people just, they don't understand. Like they don't understand how truly counterproductive this mode is.
I see it in myself, the impact that the culture has had on me. And I can sit here at this ridiculously large podcast table on my moral high horse thinking that I have all the solutions, and because I'm discussing what's unfolding, I'm immune to it. But then I do sit in my room in silence and I go, whoa, my whole life trajectory has been impacted by this too. I mean, I recently filmed an interview for my friend Chris Griffin at Laird Hamilton's house here in LA. And we were having lunch afterwards. We were having a nice chat. And then his wife came and ate with us. And she kind of shook my hand when we were on the way out. And I said, thank you, like, lovely to meet you. And I thought that was going to be that. And she stops me. She goes, no. Wait, take a step back. Shake my hand properly, like you mean it. Look at me in the eyes and don't be scared. Shake my hand. And it kind of made me reflect on the fact that I myself, as a very extroverted person, I still have all of these fears of overstepping with a woman when all I'm doing is shaking her hand and saying hello or goodbye.
Wow, we're like back to, you might as well be living in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and that's the irony with all of this. It's this sort of social media rage bait division horseshoe that's going on, where you go so far to one end that you come back to these stereotypes, the division and segregation that you see in authoritarian theocracies.
Yeah. Look, think about the number of women who don't get necessarily to go on a business trip for their company anymore because men are afraid of potentially being in a situation where there would be a misunderstanding. She would make an accusation, something like that. This has done huge damage to women professionally, personally, politically. That's the irony of this whole thing. Like, by demanding your rights in this particular way, you have given them up. And it requires like a couple steps of logic to get there. And, is it fair that a woman would not be asked to go on a business trip? I mean, I'm not talking about like a woman in a very high position. I'm talking like if you are a junior level executive or somebody who's, coming up in the company. Is it fair that the men in charge would be, uncomfortable or wary or maybe stay away from you, not be willing to mentor you, for example, because they're worried about something happening? No, it's not fair. But that's the reality. And this has been caused by this. I cannot tell you the number of women in business who have said, I want to be mentored by men. I want to be mentored by women too. Yes, fine. But there are men in my company, in my professional world, who have things to offer me, who I would like to learn from, who won't, they're not up for that kind of dynamic. They don't want to have lunch, because they just don't want to risk it. And that's tragic.
How do we move forwards from this?
I hate to do that thing where I turn it back on you, but I really don't know, because my solutions are they're so rooted in the past, and I'm not bullish enough on technology to kind of figure out a way. I do think that a more analog kind of life. I mean, it already is being glamorized. It's already kind of becoming a thing. It's like a lifestyle flex, right? I do think that we're going to get to a point where being offline, having in-person events, conversations, gatherings that are not, social media is not allowed. I mean, I run events, for instance, where we are not allowed to have our phones out. We're not allowed to use social media. I think that that's going to become more appealing to people. The problem is it's not available to everybody. Like, it's expensive to get together. It's hard to bring yourself to get out of your house. Like, you've got to get dressed and get in your car or an Uber or get on the bus or something and go someplace and meet people and sit down and order a soda or whatever it is and have an experience. And I just feel like people are going to come up with all sorts of excuses as to why that's not available to them. And I don't know how we're going to get past that.
How much of this complaining do you think is just cope for a lack of discipline, a lack of self-regulation and short-sightedness? Because I see this all the time. And as someone who's grown up, not religious especially, I often have conversations with Christians and they'll speak about the value of a family unit and getting married and monogamy and all things that I buy into. But at first, I'd be more suspicious. And importantly, my first thought is, you're a bit boring, aren't you?
Oh.
And it certainly isn't anymore, but it was. And I see this all the time, especially when I introduce new friends to religious friends or people who are just a little bit older. Their first intuition seems to always be, when I speak to them after, they are boring. But I think the tide is changing. And I think people are cottoning on to the fact that a lot of these boring things are just a sign of more maturity and more ability to refute our hedonistic impulses. So I am bullish on Gen Z, especially, and sort of the next generation coming up, that we are starting to turn around and that we perhaps are realizing that a lot of these things we throw around, especially our ambitions of, I'm going to sleep with as many women as possible, I'm going to buy the Ferrari, I'm going to buy the Rolex, they're just cope for us being immature.
Yeah. I'm laughing because, like, when I was in my 20s, that kind of stuff was so uncool. Like, you would roll your eyes at somebody like that. Because it was just so clearly overcompensating. I mean, like somebody had we would always joke if somebody had like a hot car, like a muscle car, like, oh, that's a small penis car. Everybody said that. It was just sort of assumed. Yeah. The whole going to church thing is really interesting too, because I remember even like 3 years ago, I was always seeing this stuff online, like on Twitter, and like, oh, all these women who want to settle down, like their biological clock is ticking, whatever. They want to find a mate, like they're gonna go to church. Like you'd see all these like manosphere guys being like, why doesn't she go to church? Why doesn't she go to church? Why is she hanging out in the bar? Like what, they're all doing OnlyFans. What a bunch of hoes. Like, these girls should go to church. And then you're like, there's no men in church. Like, these girls are supposed to go to church and what? Like, hang around with 80-year-olds? I don't know. But now we're seeing ostensibly men going to church. Are they really? Are they going to the same church as these young women who want to settle down? Or, like, are they making their own church? Is like the church of YouTube? What is it?
I wonder again how much of this church thing is cope. It goes both ways, and I'm bullish on people finding these more meaningful attributes in their life and actually pursuing stuff that is forever. I mean, nothing's forever, but that's at least closer to being permanent rather than just a car. But again, like, we're both two, I'd say, quite politically non-binary individuals sat at a table, the heterodox sphere, so to speak.
That's a church, by the way.
What I see as well is people then overcorrect and they go all in. I'm converting to Christianity within a month of finding Jordan Peterson speaking and lecturing about the Gospels, and I'm going to go celibate until I'm married and I'm not going to drink ever again and blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. And there again, the key thing here is it's this attachment to identity. And actually, that too is an inability to have balance. There's the hedonism at one end of the spectrum, hookup culture, blah, blah, blah. Then the other end of the spectrum is being so introverted and scared of confrontation that you masquerade as a conservative Christian in a tweed jacket.
Yeah. This is why you see a lot of gender detransitioners becoming very conservative. I have noticed this. So people who get swept up in gender stuff, trans identity, that sort of thing, they get really political. They get into that whole movement. We all know what that's about. And then I have seen many cases where somebody suddenly does an about face. They realize this is not a real thing. They detransition, but then suddenly they're like trad. Like, it's not just enough to not be transgender anymore. Like, now they want, they're going to be super Christian, or they want to settle down and have a bunch of kids, and then they're lecturing everybody on that. It's the same pathology, right? Like, people want extremes. There's a reason that, people who have addictions, they trade one addiction for another. Like, that's just the classic, right? Look, everything is cope. Everything is cope. I see people talking about, how having a child is the best thing. They don't even know how they lived before. How was I even alive before I had a child? What was the point of anything? And, now I only know what love is because I have a family and I have a wife and all this. And it's like, you are being awfully effusive. If you were really, really enjoying your life at this particular moment as you sit there typing, I kind of doubt you would be this insistent on how this is the only way. That smells a little bit like cope.
The production of this video is made possible by gear from DFI Rentals. Book your next film equipment instantly at dfirentals.com. I want us to keep on trying to work towards solutions here rather than trying to...
You're talking to the wrong person then.
Play the game of playing on people's negativity bias and just complaining. So one of the things I think we're missing off here is we're never going to get any solutions if we're blocked from speaking about what those may be. And the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk has had me thinking about this relentlessly. The difference between saying that words are violence, then saying that silence is violence all of a sudden, and then us now seeing what actual violence looks like.
Right.
Talk to me about your thoughts since that assassination, the reaction from both sides of the political aisle.
Well, I have been heartened to see that most serious people, most adults, political leaders, people in the media, most of them, not all, have been able to say, this is a tragedy, this is a human life, this is not acceptable. I didn't agree with what he said, but we cannot tolerate this. Okay, I think that for the most part, that's being said. What I don't like is that we can't seem to agree on what he actually did say. I did not follow Charlie Kirk closely. I saw his little videos. I saw snippets of things. I knew that he had been a kind of edgelord type when he was much younger. But it's not even a lack of consensus about what he said, but an unwillingness to even learn. Like, I know plenty of people on the left who are uninterested in any narrative other than that he was a hate monger. And I know people more on the right or even in the center who are uninterested in the possibility that he might have said really vile things at certain points, and that what he was doing may not have been as productive as his highly curated, edited video clips made it look like. I don't know what the reality is. I can just tell you that these are the two interpretations and that they are both wrong.
So I suppose the question becomes, are you right?
Always. No, I'm never right. The problem is that, people always say there's two sides to every story. There's infinite sides to every story. There's a side for everybody telling the story. I think in my book, The Unspeakable, I have an essay in there and I talk about, I think, I was talking about my relationship with my mother and her death and her relationship with her mother. And, I say in the history of the world, a whole story has never been told. I can't tell you the whole story because I'm just one person. By definition, I can't tell it. Nobody can tell the whole story. They can tell their story, a version of it that they happen to have concocted. It's not even their whole story, because by the time you metabolize it, it just becomes a story. So I don't know. I do think that I think we're at a pretty negative place now in human civilization, and people feel pretty crummy. But part of the reason for it is that it has been not just normalized, but almost mandated to feel bad. Like, if you don't feel bad about the world, you're a bad person. And so that doesn't help. I mean, there's a reinforcement of catastrophe, right? And if you're just kind of happy in your life and going along and feeling good about things, or even just trying to feel good about what you're personally doing, because it's too much to think about the larger world, you're not paying attention, right? You're not upset. You're not angry. You're not paying attention. Maybe just pay less attention and be less angry. Is that a crime?
Well, I want to workshop this with you as someone that is 20 years old. I try not to lean either way and belong to a tribe. I try and call out the retardation on both sides, always. But perhaps a blind spot for us is dying on the fence and never actually committing to one position. We're constantly trying to play the wise guy and be nuanced and balanced, rather than just taking action and going, okay, there are infinite stories, but truth is also a thing that exists. So we need to make a move here. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, I guess it depends on what the proposition is. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you actually trying to solve a problem? I'm not an activist. I'm a writer. I'm a podcaster, yes, and I'm an interviewer, but fundamentally, I'm a writer. So my job as a writer is not to solve the problem, but to correctly state the problem. So I believe it was Chekhov who said that. It was the job of the writer is not to solve the problem, but to state it in a way that is legible, that is clear, that is concise, that helps to other people to see what the problem is. Look, if I could solve the problem, I would be doing something else. But I do think that the unwillingness to look at the facts and state what is actually happening has been a gigantic problem. I mean, we see that now with the state of our cities. We were just talking before we started rolling about homelessness in Los Angeles, which is literally right outside our door in a huge way. And just not to get off on that for too long, but there's for a long time been a narrative that a lot of people on the left have glommed onto that, oh, there's homelessness like this on the street because of the cost of housing. Yes, the cost of housing is a problem for the reasons you stated earlier and more, but that is not the direct reason that there are people lying on the sidewalk, in some cases literally dead because of drug overdoses and fentanyl and the type of opioids that have come into our cities over the last decade. Like, that is a different thing. And if people refuse to state that, if they refuse to say this is happening for a bunch of reasons, including the way our municipalities are run and services for people and misplaced empathy, then that's the problem. I want them to actually be honest about the situation. And from there, maybe we can solve it. But, look, Thomas Sowell, there's no solutions, only trade-offs. So maybe the problem is that we're even seeking solutions. Maybe the mission should be, let's seek compromise. It's not as sexy, right?
I think we should certainly pursue solutions. And when you say your job is to articulate what's going on rather than come up with the solution to it, I just don't know where we go with that narrative when the fact is that people are tuning into your podcast looking to have the problems articulated, but I think they are also looking for solutions. And frankly, a lot of people aren't as lucky as us to be able to commentate on what's going on. So they're not going to physically have the time or capacity to solve things. So I wonder about this a lot. I mean, this whole cultural landscape online and podcastistan of articulating problems constantly and not really feeling a need to come up with solutions, especially going, yeah, but what do I know? I am just a commentator.
Right.
I'm just a comedian,
Right.
Whatever it may be. It's like, that is true, but you're also aware of the fact that the legacy media are dead because you constantly say it on your podcast, yet you're not willing to take that to the logical conclusion, which is the legacy media is dead because you now are the mainstream, podcasts, writers, whatever else in Substack. Therefore, there is a responsibility there to step up to game time and show up as the mainstream platforms that we now are. And I think that's a responsibility to not take lightly.
Yes. And I would see my job as to put people on the podcast who in many cases do offer solutions. Richard Reeves, who I mentioned a little bit ago, is an example. He studies this masculinity crisis, looking at how boys have fallen behind. He has some very specific solutions. He will suggest, for instance, this concept of redshirting, which is holding boys back a year before they start kindergarten. So if the boys really, they don't mature as fast, we have all these, we've got all this data, the girls are soaring ahead, he will propose, don't send your son to kindergarten until he's 7, and then there will be some kind of, there will be, the playing field will be more equal. So that's an example of a very specific solution that he's proposing. I've had other people propose things like, this is what we need, in terms of homelessness, people do have all kinds of solutions. Let's build a compound out in the desert that has wraparound services and, meets people where they are and yet doesn't tolerate all the things that Housing First seems to tolerate. That's an example of a solution. It's kind of messy. I think they're out there, but I will not presume to offer solutions. I mean, I'm a writing teacher. I can have somebody come and take my writing class and say, here's how to solve this logic problem that you have in this paragraph that you're not making your point. I can do that. But no, my job as a podcaster, frankly, is to have people on that will say the things that need to be said, but they will say them in a way that is palatable to the people who still need to be reached. I think of my friends, sort of liberals, progressives in my generational cohort, or a little younger, a little older, but people who are not listening to Joe Rogan, they don't have the appetite for that. They listen to NPR, or the BBC, for years and years and years, their whole lives. They are never going to tear themselves away from that. But if I can have a conversation on my podcast that makes them think and gets them to move the needle a little bit because it's not threatening to them and it's truly nuanced and it's not edgelordy, that I feel is my job. And I think I do it often.
I think that's a very important factor at play here. But I want to push you on this because I think it's interesting and push back. Let's workshop this a little bit here. As soon as you give your opinion, to me, and this is me thinking out loud here, you're essentially saying the world ought to be a certain way, right? And you're either coming up with a solution or it's a complaint. That carries water, and I think it's more than just stating what's at play. We're all influencing the culture in our own tiny, tiny ways. And at the top, these big dogs are influencing the culture in big ways. They're changing the trajectory. So I just wonder where the responsibility lies on the new media to actually come at things with a solution and to invest in something like a fact checker for all they do.
Yeah.
And that actually it should be the case that within a few years, now that podcasts are growing and there's more funding being poured into it, it should be commonplace practice to have fact checks and graphics that pop up saying this is incorrect, this is the actual stat. So we essentially become the same corporate institutions as the old mainstream media, right? There are loads of problems there too, but I just wonder if that's the only necessary next step if we're actually being responsible with the directions we're pushing the culture in.
I mean, it's hard because, we're not regulated, right? So, we're not subject to FCC regulations, so nobody can make us say anything. When you publish a book, the author is responsible for fact-checking the book. If you write an article for the New Yorker or the Atlantic or the New York Times, for instance, there are standards and practices that those entities are responsible for. They're going to have lawyers. They're going to correct something if it's wrong. I don't think people realize the degree to which an author publishing a book, even if it's published by a major house, is really on his or her own. There are a lot of books out there that are just BS, wrong. Stuff is wrong all over them. It's basically a podcast on between two covers, And so there's always been a lot of garbage out there and misinformation. It's just takes more effort to read something than it does to listen to a podcast. I don't know. We could hire fact checkers, yes, but the fact checkers have their own bias. What kind of fact checker is that? Who is that? How do you trust that person? Wikipedia is sort of a fact check entity, but it's also pretty biased. It's funny. I asked ChatGPT the other day. I was just kind of messing around, and I said, I said something like, "Are you woke?" I asked ChatGPT, and it said, "Well, it depends on how you interpret that." And that's a great question. First of all, it said, "That's a great question," and then it intimated that it was a little more left leaning than not, actually. So I don't know. We're going to have you could get AI, obviously. You could get AI fact checking in place. That will probably be the next thing. I don't think that we have the human capital to hire a bunch of actual real-time fact checkers. Are there people who are really going to do that job? It's hard to find anybody to do anything. I would really like to know if a young person is going to want to sign up to be, random podcasters fact checker before they, 6 months down the road, then they just start their own podcast.
Yeah, we've all got main character syndrome.
Yes. And that gets back to my earlier question. Why can't people just get a regular job? I'm not talking about getting a crappy job, like go to law school and get a job in a law firm. Is that the worst thing in the world? Yes, but being an independent creator is really not the best life for the vast majority of independent creators, let alone normal people.
I think something that we've been skirting around the edges of is the actual medium being the message, that classic saying. And it's such an obvious saying that people kind of underappreciate it now, I think.
Yes.
The fact that we had the mainstream media and there were certain shows on there, they present the news in a certain way. Now it's Podcastistan, it's 2-hour extended one-take conversations. And with that comes a certain set of fixed attributes based on that content, and also a certain path of unlocks that can occur. You can't have a valid conversation philosophically about something, I don't know, if free will exists, on a 1-minute news bulletin, right? Podcasts have unlocked that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm sat here wondering as a podcaster is what direction the medium will take us in now that we can have 2-hour conversations. Does it mean that we're going to be enabled to go away from this cringe, small penis, Lamborghini, instant flexing, and actually the flex and the aspiration does become being a philosopher, being able to speak for 2 hours Or do we just open up another can of worms where there are loads of problems that come with a 2-hour extended conversation, and we actually use our left brain, we're super cerebral, and we want to quantify everything into cool quotes rather than just going, step back and look at the big picture?
Well, there are 2-hour conversations with small penis Lamborghini bros going on all the time. So I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I know, isn't it funny? It's like it's either like 6 hours of Lex Friedman or 12-second TikTok clip, right? Is there no medium here? Does anybody watch anything or listen to anything for, say, 40 minutes anymore? I wonder. Again, I think that, and I know I'm probably not directly answering your question, but I'm really not sure what else to say. I think that there's a lack of interest in what you're not necessarily interested in. I mean, the thing with the legacy media was that it would force you to take in content that you didn't know anything about. I mean, Terry Gross, for instance, who's a legendary interview here in the U.S., she still has a show called Fresh Air. It's on public radio. She's in her 70s now. She will retire probably fairly soon, and it will be a very big deal. She was a huge influence on how people conduct interviews. She's a huge influence on how I conduct interviews. The show was 5 days a week on almost every public radio station in America. And she would talk to everybody, authors, scientists, philosophers, politicians, a lot of jazz musicians. Her husband was a jazz critic. But it was a Renaissance kind of show. And people loved it. And the thing about it was that it was one of the few shows that the key to, she was a good interviewer, but to me, the reason the show worked is because she had a lot of time. She had an hour, 50 minutes, an hour or so, and she could book anybody because it was huge. If you published a book, you wanted to get on Fresh Air. That was or Charlie Rose at the time, back in the day. Now it would be Bill Maher, let's say. But booking Fresh Air and getting a review in the New York Times were the two things you wanted to do if you published a book. And the beauty of that kind of programming, and there was other examples of it on public radio, for instance, was that it was you really learned stuff. I mean, they would call them, you're too young to probably remember this, but they would call this driveway moments. Mm-hmm. This was a thing on public radio. So that meant that you were in your car, you were listening to Terry Gross or whatever it was. Talk of the Nation was another fantastic show. And you would get home and you would sit in your driveway in order to finish listening to the whole thing because you didn't want to miss it. I mean, obviously it was live. You can't go back and play it. You couldn't go play it on the internet later. And so you would sit there and listen to the rest of it in your driveway. And I think that what was so beautiful about that is that you would find yourself sitting there listening to something that you thought you had no interest in. And now I never pull up a podcast about something I'm not interested in. I just want to get reinforced all the time. I just want to hear it again and again. I'm also reminded of how, when I was a newspaper columnist for 12 years in the Los Angeles Times. I wrote on the opinion page. And I had 750 words. I had to hit that mark because it was in the actual newspaper as well as online. And I was read by people who really liked me, who read me every week, who were fans, but also a whole lot of people who either hated me or were indifferent. And I would have to deal with them as an audience because it was just on their breakfast table. It crossed their line of vision and they had to read me.
Yeah.
And they never would have normally. And they would write to me and say like, oh, you suck. I can't believe you're in the paper every week. But then occasionally they would be like, wow, you really made me think of something. I would never have thought about this. And that's what's lost. We are not actually forced to encounter things that we are not already interested in.
Yeah, everything's so curated.
Yeah.
And it was the case a few years ago, even like in my living memory, that we'd be able to curate our feeds. We'd be able to follow certain people, certain friends, influencers that we like, people with political leanings that we agree with. And that would be our own safe space, this fluffy echo chamber. Now it's gone a step further when the entire app is curated.
Yeah.
You now have Blue Sky and you have X. And you can tell a lot about a person based on whether they're on Blue Sky or X.
I
right?
hate both of those people, by the way, but yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
I stay away from both.
Yeah.
But then even on these more lifestyle-y social media apps of Instagram and TikTok, it's gone away from you curating your feed yourself to having it curated for you by an algorithm. And I think that gets pretty dangerous pretty damn fast.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's terrible. If you really want to know somebody, you should see what their algorithm looks like, right? I mean, it does not reflect well, I can tell you. What the algorithm thinks I want to see is not something I would necessarily bring up at a dinner party. Although there's a lot of stuff about dogs. It shows me a lot of St. Bernard footage. A lot of St. Bernard content.
That's the redeeming factor
Yes.
then. But I mean, I see people and friends, they have all these burner accounts on Twitter and
Right.
Blue Sky and Instagram just that they can program their algorithm differently.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
should you really have to do that?
I mean, I don't do that, but I don't.
To get an opposing viewpoint?
Yeah.
I think it should be much easier than that.
Yeah. But do you think people are just going to become so sick of this that it stops? I mean, my hope, maybe this is cope. It's hope and cope, is that we are just in a particularly pernicious blip, and that 50 years from now, we're going to look back on this time as like, that was really tumultuous. Like, that was a transition period after the rise of digital media that was very uncomfortable and very negative and had a lot of really ill effects, among, our political administrations, high among them. I hope, I do feel like the human mind and spirit is craves something better, and this will ultimately kind of tip over into that place. I mean, it may not happen in my lifetime, but I would hope that it would happen in yours. And I wonder what you think about that.
Well, it's fascinating hearing that you think we are in a specifically tumultuous period now, because a lot of people, especially from Gen X, they will say, yeah, this is just part of growing up. You're going to be an activist, you're going to have your tribe, you're going to be an emo or a punk or whatever it is, and that's normal. You're going to be a communist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of try and play down what Gen Z are facing, especially, putting it down to just the natural progression of life. Why don't you think it's that? Why do you think it's more than that, and it's specifically the time that we're in?
Well, I think it's both of those things.
Yeah.
I don't think that's wrong. But I guess I mean just the slop. I mean, just the we are bombarded with negative, destructive, erroneous, it's like an avalanche of crap all the time. The digital clutter. I mean, I was having this conversation the other day. Like, I don't know about you, but I can't. My email doesn't even work anymore, basically, because it's just crap. Oh, your thing is going to expire. Like, if you don't click on this now, or all your photos are going to be like, it's that, or they're selling you something, or it's commerce or whatever. It doesn't work anymore. There's a feeling of brokenness. I think that. Everything feels broken. I mean, Alana Newhouse, who's the editor of Tablet magazine, has written beautifully about this, and I've spoken with her about it. And so it's this feeling of brokenness that I'm talking about. Yeah, obviously people are going to go through their emo phases and everything. They used to go through them privately. The problem is that now their emo phase is an identity and a protected class. It used to be just kind of a fashion you were messing around with. But no, there's something that feels uniquely difficult and even terrible about this time.
I think you've touched on it there. perfectly this identity problem that we have. I see that as at the heart of a lot of this stuff, because as soon as you attach something to your identity and you don't sever it as just an idea and keep it at arm's length, if someone disagrees with you, they're not disagreeing with you. It's a personal attack.
Yeah.
And that leads to people just blocking out everything else that's said because it's encroaching on them and who they are. And there are loads of problems to unpack there with what we actually mean by who we are too. How do you think university plays into all of this? How have you seen that develop in all your years writing?
I graduated college in 1992. I, at that time, never had a sense that critical thinking was anything but the coin of the realm. That's what we did. We argued. We did not take things personally. I mean, maybe there was a few proto-woke people in like your feminist film theory class that were into that stuff, But for the most part, it was all about ideas. And arguing was fun, actually. It was kind of sexy. Like it was how you showed that you had energy. There was a spark to that. I mean, it was actually seductive, like a way to people kind of like hook up with somebody by flirting with them, arguing about them. Yeah, seriously. It was an intellectual argument was like a form of flirtation. There was a real kind of erotic energy to it often. For me anyway. But I think probably by the late 90s, it started to change. Camille Paglia has written really great stuff about this. She says that a cohort of professors started coming up, the old guard started to retire, people who had been academics probably starting in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that generation retired. You had people coming up through the humanities that were not as rigorous in their thinking. You had the downstream effects of affirmative action, DEI, this kind of thing. So you just had a different sensibility. And also, like, more people were going to colleges. Liberal arts departments were changing a lot. They were expanding. So you had people coming in and teaching in liberal arts programs that just had a different... They were more woke. Like it was the beginning of that. And so that became the baseline sensibility for college, for certain kinds of colleges. Again, not all of them, not tech schools, not trade schools, not big public universities at that time. This was happening in elite liberal arts colleges, the ones that then fed into the New York Times. You graduate from Yale, you go, if you don't go work for McKinsey, maybe you go work for the New York Times or NPR, or you go, become an academic, teach somewhere. So I just think it was a different generation of academics. And that was a huge part of the change.
Do you think too many people are going to university?
100%, as they say in podcast land. 1,000%, Elliot. Yeah, there's no need for it. We need people to, I'm not the first person to say this. We need people to go to trade school and learn how to fix your refrigerator, because that's something that ChatGPT cannot do for you.
Yeah, I think it's choosing comfort instantly and choosing the status associated with a piece of paper that is actually pretty meaningless now. And post-grad jobs don't seem to be earning you more money until you eventually climb up the greasy pole of careers through networking anyway. A lot of people, they graduate and then they go and work in a coffee shop for years because they can't get employed because they don't have enough experience. There's that paradox going on. And I think it's partly down to lazy employers as well. There's kind of this paradox where on one hand, people are graduating and everyone's graduating because everyone's going to university.
Right.
They're doing these jobs because degrees are required. Yet they get to their interview and the interviewer goes, "You don't have enough experience for me. You haven't demonstrated any potential, any proactivity because you've just been at university." And I don't know where we go from here in terms of the massive cohort that is coming through at the moment in Gen Z. Most of my friends are at university. I chose not to go because I'm just a contrarian asshole. But I don't know where they're going to go. It's fascinating to me what's going to happen in the next 10 years when all of my friends and all the people around me do graduate and there's just not room for them in jobs. Are they going to have to go back to trade school and not graduate until they're 30?
Well, so do they not have the idea that going to college will help them network and get a job? I mean, that was the idea before. You wanted to go to an elite college because that would be your network and you would get a job through some Yale alum. Is that off the table now?
That's certainly not what college is for. It's about partying, having sex, having experience.
Okay, but all those things.
Making friends for life.
Right.
But it's not networking.
Really?
Anyone I speak to, it's not about the network. It's about the experience of having done college. It's now a bucket list thing rather than a network and a way into employment.
Okay, but don't you think that they will realize later that that is their network? I mean, what do they think? Is it because we can network online that it obviates the need for your alumni network?
Perhaps, but especially, and it might be different in the US, you guys have frats and sororities, and it seems to be much more cohesive. Whereas in the UK, people that I speak to at least, they kind of just graduate from university and that's it in regards to their friend groups. They had drinking buddies, not friends for life.
Huh. Okay. Wow, that's interesting because, you know, that the whole reason, the upward mobility was all around this idea of you would go to fancy college and then you would know those people and they would help you get a job or they would introduce you to your future spouse. And, you know, this is how the elite sustains itself. Well, I can't remember your initial question. Yes, definitely too many people go to college. You know, it's so much harder to get into college than it used to be, too, because it's an international marketplace, right? Like average, above average American kid is competing with people from all over the world to get into some second tier college.
Well, what's happening in the UK is the grade standards are dropped for international students because they bring in more money. So you're lowering the quality that you're aspiring to have on your campuses just as a money grab.
Yes. So that's an example of a problem that could be solved if the problem was stated correctly, right? So like that's a thing that probably people are afraid to, they have been afraid to say out loud because they're going to seem xenophobic or racist or whatever it is. But hopefully we can get to a point where we say, oh no, this is happening. This is just an economic reality and we need to address it by holding everybody to the same standard, perhaps.
I want us to sidestep and speak about the trans debate that's unfolding. And I try not to cover it too excessively.
Why?
Because I think there are more important things we should be speaking about.
Au contraire.
However, I am aware of the importance of it in its own right. I just think in terms of my airtime, there are more valuable things and more pressing things to be discussing. What's going on here in America, and why do you care so much about the trans debate?
Why do I care so much? Because it's about everything, you know? We are arguing over what is material reality. It's the trans debate, it's a tapestry. I mean, it has everything. It has, like, you know, the medical institution, and it has issues of mental health, and it has issues of style and the entertainment world, and it has, you know, the rise in autism. Has the rise in autism diagnoses and the gay movement and what that means and like medical malpractice and recovered memory and just all these things. And it's like all of the kind of all of the sort of major threads to pull on in the culture, I think, over the last 50 years have coalesced into this movement of people deciding that they are materially the opposite of what they are and then asking us to go along with it. I mean, to me, it's a microcosm of what's happening more broadly. Like, we are being presented with things that are not true and being asked to go along with them in a big way across a lot of metrics, right? And so it gets distilled into this weird little movement that's actually not so little because it's happening all over the place. And I just think it's fascinating.
What do you think is going to happen in the next few years? Because in the UK, we're Turf Island.
Yes, I know, yes.
Very different to the US. Do you see America as moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that liberals are starting to catch on. Part of what's happened, part of, the reason that we've been so slow is that we have this, we're so haunted by the specter of gay, oppression of gay people, lack of marriage equality, all this kind of thing, and conversion therapy. And it had this religious valence. I mean, part of the reason I think you don't have this as much in the UK is that you don't have this sort of legacy of religious fundamentalism, Christian preachers converting gay people. I mean, really horrible things that were done. And so a lot of people in the US have assumed that trans is just gay rights 2.0. Like, oh, well, we were wrong about that, so we're not going to make the same mistake again. And I think slowly people are starting to realize that not only is it not gay rights 2.0, it actually is a form of conversion therapy because some significant percentage of these trans-identified kids are actually gay, and they don't want to be gay either because of internalized homophobia or their own families are homophobic. I mean, I know many instances of families that would rather have a trans kid than a gay kid. So, but these are complicated issues, and unfortunately, it was the political right who was talking about this for longer and in a way that wasn't very palatable to the left. And it really has taken some a critical mass of voices that were more careful, I think, and more respected among liberals to start speaking up. So I think we'll start to see it change. But a lot of people are hanging on,
Well, I really value your input as an authoritative voice on this, and I know you've covered it a lot on your show. Talk to me about the actual severance of sex and gender and where we should go semantically from here for anyone that's watching, listening, that buys into gender ideology.
Well, sex that has to do with phenotype, right? Like there's two sexes. There's male and female. Gender, Judith Butler, who was, kind of the original sin here, coined the idea of gender, and she saw it as the performance of your sex. So gender is like a philosophical concept. It's an idea. Sex is a real thing. Okay, that's a biological reality. Part of what happened is that people did not want to use the word sex because it means sexual intercourse also, right? So even someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, famous Supreme Court justice, she would argue for sex-based rights. When she was putting her arguments forth, she would use the word gender because sex was like icky. And especially back then, people didn't want to hear it. So you hear this all the time as people all, use those words just alternatively. And that's been very confusing to people. So if somebody wants to say, I identify as a different gender, I still think that's a little silly, but I'm like, okay, well, you're not literally saying you can change sex. But I think that it's concept creep, right? So be like, oh, I can be a different gender, and gender means sex, so I can change sex, therefore. And you can't. So I think there was a big semantic issue there. And it remains so to this day. I mean, Americans are very puritanical. We don't like to talk about sex, apparently, but we'll talk about gender.
Yeah, well, I wonder if there's any weight in having the word gender at all. It's so difficult to separate things because everything's gotten so messy. And I was reading into the history of where gender actually comes from. And it used to be sort of a label for inanimate objects versus animate objects. And then eventually it progressed to sort of...
Yeah, in language. I mean, right? Like, if you're like, if in a romance language, there are gendered, there's, the nouns and verbs are gendered, right? They're not sexed. So yes, exactly.
And then it kind of crept into a rough proxy for gendered norms and duties that you would carry out.
Mhm.
So something like a sword would be masculine because men would be fighting. And then eventually you get down and it sort of creeps into sex and it encroaches on your actual physical sex. I wonder if there is any compromise to be had with pronouns, or if we just go all out, he, him, she, her.
I'm really torn about this. On one hand, I know the dangers of playing along and kind of humoring somebody out of kindness when there is material reality. Just as silence is not violence, using a particular pronoun is not violence. So I totally understand people who take the position that they are going to use biological pronouns, even for people who are presenting pretty convincingly as the opposite sex. I understand their position intellectually. On the other hand, I'm not sure that's a hill worth dying on. You can make all kinds of cogent, careful, respectful arguments about the folly of the transgender movement, about the fact, and I would say it is a fact, that the vast majority of people who are trans-identified are not trans. I'm not even sure what trans means at this point, although that's slightly off to the side. You can get into it. You can be pretty honest about this. You can be pretty blunt and fearless. I'm not sure why refusing to use somebody's preferred pronouns is really that helpful as part of the mix. I find that you lose the room. I can have a pretty respectful disagreement with somebody if I use their preferred pronouns. The minute I start doing it, I've lost them. Now, is that intellectually honest of me? No, it's not. It's convenient. So I don't know. I'm really torn.
Yeah, I suppose the problem is that rules are written in language. And if you buy into the wrong use of language, you have no way of arguing because you're going, no, the trans woman, she's not a woman. Like, okay, cool. But you just called her she. And I'm torn on this too. And I've been going back and forth on it and deliberating for so long, especially having produced the Trigonometry podcast, where I've sat in for all the big dogs coming into the studio and giving their take on the trans debate. I just don't know if there's any other solution than being harsh and going, look, I'm not going to call you by your preferred pronouns because that is contrary to reality. The question may be, can we sever pronouns from reality? Pronouns become your vibe. So you are she, her, because you are a female vibe. And we just draw a harder line in the sand and go, okay, you're a female vibe, but you're not a female. So you're not allowed into female changing rooms. But then the problem comes of, okay, you're a female vibe. What on earth does that mean?
Well, yeah, I was going to say vibe is in the eye of the beholder, right?
You just have to stereotype.
Right,
you go, yeah, you're a female vibe because you like wearing flowery dresses and doing housework. Like, that is everything that these people fought against for decades.
Of course.
So with that issue, and before I've argued that there is a compromise, that you can go, yeah, you're a female vibe, but there's a distinction there between vibe and sex. I've argued that before, but what I've realized is the logical conclusion of that is you have to answer what is a female vibe, and it's a circular answer because you just go, whatever you say a female vibe is. So I don't think there is any other solution than refusing to use preferred pronouns.
Yeah,
I'll go out and put it on the table, get myself cancelled as a Gen Z TERF. There it is.
No, I mean, I think that's a very intellectually honest appraisal. Also, like, what is a vibe? What's any vibe? Like, that's totally subjective. Like, somebody can say thinks somebody has a female vibe, and another person could say, I don't think that's a female vibe at all. That's one of the things that I run up against when people say, well, I guess I'm going to make my pronoun decision based on how I see this person. Like, and they'll cite an example of somebody who passes very, very well, like Blair White, for instance, is a biological male, trans-identified woman who you would never clock as male, right? So, okay, someone will say, well, I'm going to extend my courtesy to somebody like Blair White, but not to somebody like, who's clearly has not passed as well. My problem with that is you are granting privileges to somebody just because they're passing. Like, that seems unfair. That's like you're discriminating against somebody because of their attractiveness or something. Like,
Yeah.
not everybody, like Blair White, yes, she's done a lot of work to look that way, but she also just has a particular kind of frame. Like, there's all kinds of genetic advantages.
And you're incentivizing excessive work there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that then you are just prioritizing people based on their appearance and their attractiveness. And so that doesn't seem right to me. You're rewarding them for passing. That's unfair. So, yeah, I don't know. I really don't know the answer. I do think they should just build more gender neutral bathrooms. I mean, that seems like a very obvious solution, right? I know it's costs more, but the more bathrooms, the better everywhere, I think.
It's so tough to unpack. And the thing that's important to state, especially with the positions that we have here, is the pity that I feel. And perhaps pity is too patronizing of a word, but the empathy I feel for people that are affected by this and that have bought into the myth that they do need to cut off genitalia to affirm their real identity. As a 20-year-old growing up amongst this, especially in Brighton and Hove, which is the LGBT capital of Europe pretty much and the world, I just look at it and it's so, so sad. It really, really genuinely upsets me. I know so many people that have transitioned and that have made all these compromises about life and about their long-term fulfillment for this short-term thing that they were sold when they were like 13.
Yeah.
And it just terrifies me that something can hijack a culture in this way.
Yes.
And that's the big thing with the trans issue. Like I was saying earlier that I try not to cover it too much because I think there are other bigger things, to be a bit utilitarian, something like social media or depopulation. Like I think it affects us all more so. But in its own individual right, for the people that it does affect, the trans thing is disgusting and horrifying and upsetting. So I'm sat here trying to find the balance of how much I should discuss it without also being grifty and just jumping on it because it's going to give me a bunch of views.
I discuss it because I feel I discuss it in the right way. Not to put too fine a point on it. When I started my podcast in 2020, I knew I wanted to talk about it in a pretty early episode. And I looked really hard for the right person. I did not want to have somebody who'd already been on a lot of podcasts. I did not want to have somebody who, was good at getting attention about it, but still used kind of polarizing language. I was being a bit of a squish, okay. But I just, again, my goal was to present a conversation that my nice public radio listening friends could hear and think, oh, okay, I get it. I get why this is important, and I get why we need to talk about this, and I get where I've been misinformed by this. And, I pulled Sasha Ayad out of the ether. I had heard she's a therapist here in the U.S. who specializes in teen mental health and gender. And I had heard her on some random podcast somewhere, like deep in the depths. And I brought her and I tracked her down. I brought her and I think it was my 5th episode. And we had an amazing conversation. And she said she was so nervous. She later told me she was like in her bathroom because it was the only like soundproof area she could find. And she had all these notes and she was trying to figure out how to talk about it. And this was 2020. We were talking about it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And, several people said to me, that was the best conversation I've ever heard about this topic ever. And I had to agree, actually. I was really pleased with how it went. And, 5.5 years later, everybody's talking about this. Sasha has had her own podcast with Stella O'Malley, who's in Ireland. She's now doing her own thing. She's a major voice in this issue. And she remains very, very nuanced. Lisa Selin Davis is somebody also I have on a lot, and I really like the way she reports on this and talks about this. But there are so many people who have just veered into the like, oh, this is all, they're all mutilating themselves. They're all crazy. Just no sympathies should be extended. We've got Matt Walsh, who makes very funny documentaries. I really enjoyed his documentary about this, but that's not winning over the people that we need to win over. It's not winning over the nice Volvo driving progressives. And those are the people who need to hear this. It's not the people on the right. It's the people on the left. And so I keep talking about it because I really want to reach those people. I want to do the conversation in a way that they will feel comfortable sharing with their friends. So, yeah.
Do you think you're being optimistic? Do you think there is a pulling them out with a podcast and with a reason?
I think there is. It's already starting to happen. People are realizing that this is not right. They didn't know. Like, you would say things like the whole phenomenon of AGP, which again, I know hope we don't get demonetized for talking about this, is autogynephilia. This is a certain typology of a trans identification. It's not everybody. It's not the kids, but it's a certain type of male who is aroused by the idea of himself as a female. Typically, those have been the kind of middle-aged cross-dressers that we would see. Again, that's not all of them, but it's a significant percentage, and a lot of the trans activism is dominated by men in that subset, and they're very aggressive and they're very stereotypically male. Ironically, it's a movement that is being dominated by pretty aggressive male voices, which is why you get a lot of very angry feminists who I think in a lot of ways take it too far, but I understand what they're reacting to. Just the existence of that phenomenon, it needs to be articulated in a way that people can understand, because otherwise they just think, oh, these kids just want to be themselves. They just want to be who they are. They're just like gay kids. And it's like, no, that's actually not what is going on. It is a homophobic movement. It is a movement that perpetuates the very gender stereotypes that the second wave feminists fought against. And so that's why it's so fascinating. And I just think that any opportunity to talk about it responsibly and with great nuance needs to be taken advantage of.
Well, I want to push you on this, mostly for my own benefit of working this out. It does perpetuate stereotypes that we're far beyond, but that's part of buying into this kind of vibe idea, and I'll use your preferred pronouns idea. I just don't see any escaping the fact that you either buy into the stereotypes or you don't use preferred pronouns.
Back to the pronoun question again. I don't know how to answer that. I guess at this point, I feel like if I refuse to use pronouns, I would alienate enough people that it would dilute what I'm trying to do. And again, that is a compromise. That is not intellectually honest. But I don't. If I just refuse to use anybody's pronouns, I just think that I just don't know what the point of that would be. I want to say what I have to say, and I think it would undermine my credibility. A whole lot of TERFs think I've already done that because I kowtow to some of this, and I've said this before. Are there some does true trans exist? That's a question, right? I don't know the answer. I tend to think it does not. I also know people who transitioned as children, began that process, and appear to be thriving. So I don't know what to do with that information.
Clarify for me what you mean by true trans.
Is it possible to actually be, quote unquote, born in the wrong body? That's how we used to frame it, right? Can you be true trans? Can you have a female brain in a male body? I guess that would be the definition of true trans.
I suppose it depends on what you mean by wrong.
Exactly. So, I had a guest on my show once. This was an anonymous guest. This was a detransitioner, a biological male. And he gave the best definition of trans that I'd ever heard. And he said, if you're trans if transitioning makes you happier and keeps you happier, then you're trans. So, insofar as there are people who have transitioned who are happier, okay. But I don't think you can I know you cannot look at a 2-year-old and say that is a transgender child. No.
When can you?
I mean, people would say there's no such thing as a trans child. I guess if you're going to follow that logic, I guess if you're an adult and you make the decision on your own and you transition and you're happier, then you're trans. But then you get into this passing problem. I mean, the only reason childhood transition came about was because people who were older and transitioned couldn't pass as well. And so they wanted to extend this opportunity to children. I mean, that's what the Dutch protocol was all about. So this, again, it all comes down to passing. And that, yeah, it would suck. It would really suck if you were coming into puberty and not the body that you want, and profoundly not the body you want, not just like, I don't like puberty, which most people don't. I think that would be horrible. But the number of people that we're seeing that think that they're truly, truly going into puberty in the wrong body, that doesn't line up with any kind of biological, statistical probability.
What do you see as the way forward for Gen Z? All of these issues seems to be some overarching things: identity, social media, selling hysteria. Where do we go in the next couple of decades?
I think Gen Z is pretty good about saying, this was the sort of post-60s liberal project. These are the parts of it that worked, and there are parts of it that simply did not work. I think they're saying we were sold this idea that women should be in the workplace in the same way that men are, that you could raise a family with 2 working parents, that was by definition better because it was more equal. Sometimes it's better, of course. It's better for some families. But it's not always. I think that there's a critique of sort of baby boomer era liberalism and progressivism that is very worthwhile. I just think that they need to make sure to do it in a responsible way and actually do it with logic and conversation and not memes. I know I sound like a scold. I'm really into respectability politics. I really am. And I talk about it a lot in my book, The Problem with Everything. But I think how you comport yourself is huge. Don't do yourself the disservice of coming across like an unserious person. Be the adult in the room. So much of what's happened is that the adults left the room. The whole wokeness project is because the adults left. The people running the New York Times were suddenly the children, the teenagers. And the adults were like, oh my God, I don't want to get canceled, so I'm not going to participate in this. I got to retire. I got to hobble through the next 10 years, pay my kids' college tuition, pay off my mortgage, and then I'm out of here. So they just ceded all authority to people whose brains just weren't all the way developed, right? Their minds were so open that their brains were falling out, right? So I would look to Gen Z to kind of be the adult, actually, to go back to, what is an adult? It got very out of fashion. The boomers hated being adults. That's why all the adult men wore backwards baseball caps all the time, because they wanted to not be the man, right? They wanted to be cool. And I think you had a lot of people get going well into middle age, still identifying as the teenager because they were used to being in opposition to some kind of authority. But I think that Gen Z is in a unique position to say oh, actually, we're going to be the adults. It's cool to be the adults.
There's so many questions to ask you from that. And I also want to pick you up on your liberalism point and ask you about the link between feminism and the progression of feminism and female unhappiness. But we'll do that over on Substack. So
okay.
Meghan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm resisting saying your surname because I see every single podcast to make this point as their opening question. And they're like, oh, tell me about the history of your name. Is it Daum? Is it Daum? And I know...
Oh, yeah, this is a whole thing. I keep changing it. You can, I don't know. You can say either.
We'll say Meghan.
Meghan. I'm gonna be like a one name person, like Cher or something like that. Yeah.
Your
or
preferred,
Lizzo.
your preferred name and pronouns.
Yes.
Where can people find more of your work?
Oh my gosh, too many places. I'm on Substack. My podcast is now called the Unspeakeasy. And they can look up the Unspeakeasy. They can go to meghandaum.substack.com to find me, or just the Unspeakable podcast, which is the previous name of it. Go to meghandaum.com to learn about my books. The unspeakeasy.com is my Unspeakeasy project. And I don't know, just Google me and all kinds of horrible things will come up. So.
And head on over to Substack, where Meghan will answer your questions. See you there.